Too late. I already hit the button.
Hey, we're live.
What
Good
is
morning,
up?
everyone. I'm still eating bacon.
All right. That's one way to
Still eating
start
the
the
bacon.
morning.
Good morning, everybody. It's still early here. It is Saturday, January 13th at 9 a.m. Welcome, guys. Good morning. Good morning. How's it going?
There
Happy
we go.
Saturday. You
Happy
doing good?
Saturday.
Always excited for Saturdays meeting up with you guys. This has definitely been the highlight of the past few
Oh,
years.
it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like the best time of my week.
Yeah. It
It's
was
weird.
cool because we were
Oh,
just we were just talking about what we've been each been working on for the past week, and I was sharing some cybersecurity stuff with you, kind of blew your mind, and you
yeah.
guys were sharing with me what you've been up to. It's pretty cool to have a little group to do all this.
Yeah,
It is.
it's true. It's funny, like prior to us having this group, I think I would just sleep in usually on Saturdays and not do anything. But this is a good way to motivate myself to actually take advantage of Saturdays because they're one of those days where you don't want to do anything, but the more that you do on Saturday, the better you feel about the weekend.
Oh, dude, it helps
You
so
agree?
much too. Because afterwards, yeah, you're motivated afterwards too to actually keep doing stuff. It always helps me. It also helps me solve problems, and like then I'm motivated to actually do it. And it's like early, so you get it done before it's even too late in the day. It's nice.
Yeah, right on.
Before we get into things, anybody who's watching, let us know, what are you doing this Saturday? Are you going to be doing any coding? Or do you have some lawn work? Or are you going on an adventure in the outdoors? Let us know what you're up to this
Mm.
Saturday.
I might do some lawn work today.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah,
I need to cut the grass. Yeah. I have some really cool orchids growing right now. My gosh, popping off. I know it's like
orchids
freezing
are awesome,
everywhere else, but it's actually it's decent here.
dude. It was 58 here this morning, and it's gonna
It's
drop
pretty nice.
to
It was like
22
66
tonight.
here yesterday, so we're not
Yeah,
that far off actually.
now
Anyway,
we got a warm spell
we're talking about the weather. We're like old men now.
right now. That's what happens.
Well, listen, I think I've told you guys, but I guess I'm going to tell the group. So I started this challenge among all the other things that I've taken on this week with coding for the startup that I work for, building our own website, which by the way, check it out. If you guys have not seen it yet, go ahead over to codenoobs.io. We just launched that website, so you can go check that out.
That's
But I've been
awesome.
building that website and building, just some features which we're going to release in the near future. But on top of all of that, I started this new challenge with my girlfriend. It's called 75 Hard. And so I'll explain what it is really briefly because I know, Randy, you dirty mind. Like,
Yeah,
75
the
hard.
so
name
dirty. It's like a two
the
year old.
name is deceptive.
Yeah.
It is deceptive.
Anyway, here's the deal. It's a challenge, right? For 75 days, you have to do these things. You have to follow a diet plan of your choice of some sort. You have to exercise twice a day for 45 minutes, and they have to be at separate times. It can't be like together. You have to read 10 pages. What else? You have
Of a
to drink
nonfiction book.
of a nonfiction book, correct? So something like, self-help, educational, something like that.
Nothing with Fabio on the cover.
Nothing with Fabio, no Lord of the Rings,
Writing books would work.
no, nothing
Yeah.
like that. You also have to drink a gallon of water and you have to take a picture of yourself every single day. So you have to do, oh, and you're not allowed to have any cheat meals or drink alcohol as well for 75 days. So this is the challenge. And, we talked about this last week, like between the three of us, and you guys were like, that's nothing. I basically do that already. I think there was something that you're like, well, maybe it was like the
Take
nonfiction.
pictures. Take pictures.
Take pictures, yeah. But also, you guys read a lot of nonfiction, right? Or do you read
Yeah,
fiction?
Oh, I
both.
read both. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, so you guys pretty much already do that. And I did a lot of those already. I think the exercising twice a day I haven't really done, which one of them I just usually walk, which is actually great exercise, and then the other one's like a more intense exercise. But the one thing that I don't do that often that you guys do is read, right? And so like I said in previous live streams, I'm more of a visual learner. Like I like to watch videos and whatever. So I've been getting into this reading and I was looking for books to read. I have a couple that I've been reading, but on the walks, I've been listening to a book as well. And that book is it's called Software Engineering at Google, right? And it's a great book. I highly recommend it to anybody who's getting into software development, particularly because it's not there's no code in the book. So it's a great book to like, you can listen to. You don't have to like visually see the code and like run code and whatever, because it's talking about software engineering, which is not programming. Can you guys tell me what you think the difference is between software engineering and programming?
Are you asking us?
Yeah, like
Oh,
YouTube.
software engineering is
No, not.
designing. It's designing the actual, like engineering the actual software, the features, what you want, maybe like the design facts, parts of it and all, and like how it's going to be structured. And the programming is actually coding it.
Yeah.
Yeah, engineers are generally very, very clean and have a nice button-up shirt, a pocket protector, whereas programmers have all their laundry on their bed that they haven't done in 2
Basically,
weeks.
it's whether you wear a button-down shirt or not.
Yeah,
And a pocket
that's a
protector.
distinction.
Pocket protector.
The pocket
With
protector.
maybe a ruler in there too, just in
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, I mean that's a basic premise, right? Is programming is like the actual act of typing code into a computer and like making a program, whereas engineering is like all of the other stuff, which is designing how the program's going to work. But it's really more of like a cultural thing, right? It's like there's all these practices that Google has that have enabled them to continue maintaining this massive code base, right? So um I'll give you an example of one way that they do this, right? So back in the day when there was when Google was very small and there were only like maybe a handful, like 100 employees or something like that. I forget the name of the person, but one of the like founding members of Google used to do this thing where every new person, the first major commit that they would make to any code base, they would do a code review with them, right? And they would look at their code. He would look at it specifically with the developer who wrote the code and do something called like a readability test, right? And so a readability test is saying, okay, how well are you following best practices in writing this code? Like, are you adding comments? Are you indenting? Are you removing white space? All these different things. I mean, now we have VS Code and things like Prettier that can handle a lot of that stuff to make your code look good. And if you're using ChatGPT, it's doing a lot of that also for you. But back then, there was none of that. So they've had this practice of having readability scores or basically ranking people and saying, hey, you have readability in this language. And that program has grown to basically every employee now in Google can still do that, where they can get what's known as readability in a certain language. And then they can like teach other people. So that's like one coding practice that they use on the larger scale within the whole company to keep their code consistent, right? And so that is more of like what software engineering is versus programming. Were you going to say something, Danny?
I was gonna say, yeah, that's important too, because that does keep the consistency. Like you're working with large amounts of code, and you can't just plop somebody in and expect them to know it if it's all written differently, right? But if you
Yeah.
have a structure and you have like you expect certain comments, you expect a certain layout, it makes it way easier to follow what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that ties in really well to today's topic, which is why you should share your code early and often, right? And so one of the things that they talk about in this book that I definitely felt and still feel sometimes as a developer, but particularly when I was starting, was that I was scared to share my code with people because I was scared of being judged or scared of feeling stupid or, you know, people seeing that I was inexperienced. It goes along with this imposter syndrome that pretty much every developer feels when they start in development, right? And so what we
And then
tend to,
after a year, and then after 2 years, and then after
and
3
then the
years,
more that you
every
learn,
year.
It's like
exactly.
everything. It's like anything, though. I remember faculty members who were nervous about showing like their papers, that their research that they're working on before they were polished and finished, or like, kids in creative writing class scared of showing their short story. It's like everything else. The more you show it, though, the more feedback you get, the better you get with constructive criticism, and the more you grow, and the better
Yeah,
you do.
exactly. So, I'm sure that if you're watching this, you probably felt that way as well, right? Where you're like, I'm not going to share my code until it's perfect, until it's polished, until I've had the opportunity to go line by line through every single thing and make sure that if anybody sees this, they won't judge me on missing a comment or, doing things using an async await versus, promises versus whatever, right? So anyway, so the recommendation here is actually not to do that, is to do the opposite, is to share your code as often as possible and as early as possible. And there's 7 reasons why they recommend it. I'm going to read them.
Before we get into that, how does someone share their code? Do they like print it out of the dot matrix printer and then give it to their buddy?
Is that a serious question?
They always do that.
I'm
You
just
have to have
because
a
maybe somebody
printer.
watching is like, well, what do you mean share your code? Like, let somebody look at my computer, or what are you talking about?
Yeah. So share your code with collaborators, right? With your mentors, with your peers, with your boss, with other, developers on your team.
Are you talking about using something like GitHub or Bitbucket or something like that, or doing it locally?
It could be GitHub, yeah, or it could be just like locally, like you sit down with somebody and show them how your code runs. And that's what I was saying with the readability, right? The first commit that this was back in the day. I think they do it a little bit different now, but back when there were only maybe like 100 employees, when they hired a new employee, the first major commit they made, they actually sat down in an office together and just looked at their code on screen right next to each other and then criticized, like, okay, this part is great, this part is not so great, this is where you need to improve, whatever, right? So yeah, I mean, I think ideally you want to do this live in person or as close to that as possible so that you can get that immediate feedback. I mean, I know that this week I did some group coding sessions with in the startup that I work with, and that was super helpful, right? Because for that particular project, I'm working mostly as a front end developer, even though I'm full stack developer, and there's a back end developer. And so a lot of times we have different ideas about how things should function. Also, understand that it's a startup, so it's very scrappy, right? It's not like we've spent months building out like models of how this entire thing is going to work together. We're just trying to build as fast as possible so we can push something to the market. So, and the way that he may think of like handling the data on the back end may not be the same as how I've expected that to happen on the front end, right? And so having these group coding sessions allows us to share ideas and get on sort of the same page of, okay, this is how this is going to happen. So that's been super helpful. And I recommend that to anybody who's sort of just been working in isolation is work with other people, because it's super, super helpful to get that immediate feedback and be able to share ideas, because regardless of how new you are to development, you have great creative ideas. There are so many aspects of life that tie into software development that you can take from previous jobs. Like if you did sales or you did customer support, all these things you will eventually tie back into your programming. And that's actually one of the best ways to stand out as a developer, is to leverage the knowledge you already have from the past as a developer. Because the guy who went to college for development and has been a developer his whole life, that's all he's ever done. Whereas you have all this other life experience as somebody who's worked in other fields. If you're transitioning into like a software development field, you have so much other information that you can like bring to the table and think of new ways to design software that's, that helps people more than maybe somebody who's only ever done software development and their brain is stuck in just software development mode. So having said that, so there are 7 real takeaways from this, 7 reasons why you would want to share your code early and often. And I'm going to go through them one by one. I made some notes and then we can sort of discuss them. How's that sound to you guys?
How about you call them out? We'll give our perspective on it, and you can tell us if we missed anything.
Oh, so just give you the name of it?
So like number 1, you shoot at Danny, number 2 at me, number 3 at Danny, number 4 at me, and then you just correct us how we were wrong and let us know if we missed anything.
Perfect. So I'm almost like I'm doing a code review with you.
Exactly. We'll do it side by side.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You know,
Perfect. All right.
just pretend there's less than 100 employees here.
Perfect. There's only 3 of us. So number one, this one's for Danny.
All right.
So the number one reason this is they aren't ranked in order, but like this is just the first one is early feedback. Sharing code early allows for early feedback from peers. This can help in identifying potential issues, misunderstandings in requirements, or design flaws, which are easier and cheaper to fix early in the design process. So
Yeah. Way easier to fix early in the process. Dude, I mean, I work on a freelance project and like, you know, there's been several times where things we agreed to in the development process, they decide to change way later.
mhm.
And like, it cost them a lot more money because had I known about that when I was actually building it, you gotta everything you do in code is interconnected. So like changing one thing often means, even if it's something stupid, changing one little thing often means changing, it could mean changing 15 components or every file within that larger project. So earlier is always better because you know what you're building ahead of time and that it's actually right and consistent with the ideas of and with the, project you're actually trying to complete.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think about it this way, right? If you're building, a larger project and you start with this small piece of code that has some issue with it, every time that you build another layer of code on top of that that interacts with that code, you're basically building that
Yeah.
problem bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you can handle that early, right? If somebody can see your code and say, "Hey, that's probably not the best way to do that," or "That's not scalable," or whatever it is, that's a security risk, right? Because that's another one too, is I'm sure you can have this perspective, Randall, is like the security risk, right?
Yeah.
If I build in a security risk at an early stage and I keep building on that and building on that and building on that, it's very hard to go back and fix that. What do you think, Randall?
I'm glad that you mentioned that because when you were talking about sharing your code early and often, I think this is a really important thing too, because most coding things will just teach you to hard code credentials in there and super
Yeah.
easy, login and password. And they never teach you about environmental variables. They never teach you about how to properly code APIs. So one of the benefits of sharing code early and often in a secure fashion is that you can learn about environmental variables and you can learn about how to securely
Yeah.
code APIs into your code. Do that from the very beginning. So then when you get a
Yes.
job working for one of these big companies and you have to put some credentials in there and an API key, you don't give the whole world your API key.
Yeah.
It is funny. They never do teach environment variables and stuff like about security
No, which
ever,
is like
especially
super
when you're early
important.
on.
In
Yeah.
fact, I remember during our boot camp, we hard coded like they were like, don't even worry about the security stuff. Let's
Yeah.
just hard code the password into
Yeah.
everything. Right. We
That's
never
wild.
learned about environmental variables. We never learned about, you know,
Any security issues and best
passwords, self
practices.
passwords, why you even need a long password. I think
Yeah.
that's super important for people to understand, but you don't get a lot of that.
Well, that's the other thing when you share a lot too, I think, is that you get that, especially when you share with people from outside your area
Yeah.
or people that are at a different level, you get the best practices from other areas brought in and explained to you. Like, well, why don't I do that? Why do I use environment variables? What's the point of that? And it's like, because it separates out the security stuff from the actual other code, so you can't just view it. And like, yeah, I mean, you get that explanation too, which is super helpful.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, so that
Number
was
two.
number one. Number two for you, Randall, is collaboration. Frequent sharing encourages collaboration. Others can contribute ideas, suggest improvements, and even catch bugs. The collaborative approach often leads to better quality software. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, I can't argue with Google writing a whole software engineering book. Uh,
Yes, you can. You're still
Sure, you
I think
can.
I think collaboration, yes, is important because you get a lot of different viewpoints, but also you shouldn't depend on collaboration because we've had experiences in our boot camp where some people depended upon collaboration. We had group
Yeah.
assignments where they would literally be like, "Can't you show your computer so I can type the
That's a
same code you're
difference
typing?"
though. That's not collaboration though. That's using them. That's using them. to do the work. That's not
Yeah.
collaboration. Collaboration's an equal
Well,
shared reciprocation of like ideas, things, you know.
Mhm.
yeah.
It implies that you did something too.
Right.
They
Yeah. I
did
mean, I,
nothing.
I get your frustration. When we were in
Yeah.
the boot camp, we
Oh
would have
God.
these like weekly workshops. I think I talked about this a little bit, probably in my video that I made yesterday, but we would have these weekly workshops, right? And the idea of the workshop was the instructor would go over the course material from that week, and then you had a workshop assignment, and you were meant to work on that either by yourself, sort of like with a group of peers around you, or with those other people. And I remember a couple things happening. Number one, many of our instructors didn't even know the course material that they were like teaching, reteaching us, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times they're like, I remember distinctly we had an instructor who would get asked very very basic questions, like how do I make a drop down menu or something like that, and they would sit there like researching this on Google for a half hour because they didn't understand and they couldn't even figure out how to look that up either, which
Yeah.
like you need to learn those skills before you start teaching other people. The second part was many of the people who came to the workshops didn't understand the material, didn't complete the material, and were basically coming just so that they could complete the material and turn it in. And when it came to doing the actual workshop work, they had no clue what was going on because they didn't understand the education and they had no support from that instructor. And then so they would just sit there while we were working in groups to do the
Yeah.
assignment. They would just ask if, you know, like the three of us could share our screens because we were taking on like a little bit more in terms of like learning the education outside of just the material they had there and whatever. And they just wanted to copy our screen, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't teach you anything when you just copy and paste. And
But
that was like one of my biggest frustrations with the boot camp was they consistently just offered this option of copy and pasting all the code, and you don't learn anything because you're not actually typing it. So
but collaboration can be better when the sum is equal to the greater of the parts.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like when you have an engaged group of people who have a desired interest and a goal in mind, like I want to become a software developer. If you want that goal, you're going to push towards that and push yourself a little bit outside of your comfort
Oh,
zone.
dude, when we collaborated weekly, I mean and we still do, but that's helped
Yeah.
so much with me because like, you know, it's
Yeah.
also different viewpoints from people who are interested in different stuff. So sometimes, you know, you might just have it could even be an idea about like naming something that just
Yeah.
is, you know, better I didn't think of, you know, and it's like there's nothing wrong with that, but like that's good because then it helps you along. It makes it, you know, better overall.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
Number three.
number three, knowledge
Yeah,
sharing.
we got 7 minutes left to burn through the.
Oh man. Well,
Oh,
we might
geez.
have to run a little long today. All right, number three is knowledge sharing. When code is shared often, it helps in spreading knowledge across a team. Team members can learn from each other's approaches and solutions, which promote a culture of continuous learning and improvement.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think, you know, the more we share, the more we engage with people we're working with, or just others in general, the more we learn and the more that knowledge gets spread so that everybody knows it, you know, and knows what to expect, which I think is also important. You get comfortable with it and you understand what you're working with. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I find myself sort of doing often when I'm coding in React is I question, am I using the right what's a word like the right approach to designing this? Because there basically every tutorial you see on React shows you different ways to do things, and that's one of the things with a lot of the languages that we have today is there's like 30 different ways to do one thing in every language, right? There's no like, hey, you want to like add A plus B, you can do it like 30 different ways, right? Maybe not for that example, but for other ones. But so I think it's really helpful to share your code with other people because there's probably somebody who's tried it a different way that's worked better. And you can either iterate through that process on your own and try each different way and see how it works, or you can just share knowledge with other people. And when you think about it, that's why we are so advanced as humans because we've had this long history of knowledge sharing, right?
Yeah.
You don't probably need to learn, like, know how to start a fire anymore, right? That's not a skill that most people have, but years ago it was. Now we've had these advancements enough where you can just buy a lighter at the store.
Yeah.
And that's the power of knowledge sharing, right? Is that people have shared knowledge throughout the years so that we've gotten to the point where we can build a lighter instead of rubbing two sticks together. And so you can either do that on your own as a developer and rub two sticks together until you figure out a better way to light a fire, or you can just knowledge share with somebody who's already has a lighter in their hand, right?
Also, when you're working on large projects too, it doesn't make sense to rewrite stuff every time and do it differently. It makes sense to be
Yeah.
consistent, which means knowledge sharing. Because like if there's a way that you already do something that works, do it again that way and move on to the next thing because it's quicker
Yes.
and you also know what to expect when you get, when you see that code again.
Yeah. And it makes your code way more readable, right? Because if
Yeah.
somebody's expecting to see, a function written or operating in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you change it up, that adds confusion, right? So
Yeah.
cool.
Just give me
No-
the topic, not the actual sentence.
okay, this one's hard. Avoid code silos.
Oh, yeah. No, this one isn't hard because basically a lot of times what'll happen is, and you see, actually, this is one of the reasons why DevOps is so popular now. Because you
Mm.
used to have these giant silos. So you would have development, you would have production, they would never communicate. And so you'd have these big silos where everybody was pointing fingers, blaming everyone else. And it was because there was zero communication that would happen. Code developers would hand it off to testers the day it was due, and then the testers would be like, well, we can't run any tests, it failed every test we have, and the developers are like, well, it needs to be in production tomorrow, so do something, write tests
So-
that'll pass, and then
Yeah.
it gets shot out
I
there.
agree with you. Can you explain a little bit about what a code silo is, though? So that, because I think some people who are watching may not fully understand what that means. What does it mean to have a code silo?
Don't know.
Okay, I'll explain it. So you're right. Like the rest of your answer is right. So a code silo is basically when somebody is the only person or there's only a few people who understand how the code works, right? Like for example, I built a web app, right? It's called Cover Better and it writes cover letters. But if I asked you guys to work on it, you wouldn't know anything about it because I coded the entire thing on my own, which is a dangerous thing to do. There's like this, I forget what they call it, they say, but in the book, they have some name for it. It's like basically like the bus test or something like that. Like if somebody gets hit by a bus tomorrow, how screwed is your project, right? There's
Well, think about a
literally what
company
it
too,
is.
though. Yeah, because if you're a
Yeah,
company dude and only one person knows how the whole thing works, you're effed if
you're
something
screwed.
happens to them, or if they leave, or if they do something else. You'll have to spend tons of time just figuring out how they're. Because think about it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
might know React or I might know Python, but give me a fully developed project, dude. It's gonna take a while to go through all that code, figure out how all the parts
yeah,
work together, and like that's the important thing. You need other people to know what you're doing.
yeah. And so like your answer is actually very right, Randall, is if you have, your testing team and your development team who are working in their own silos, they're not developing the code together. So when it comes time to like pass that code off to testers, the tests they've written don't match the code that's there, right? And so they're each working in a code silo by themselves. And, again, if those people were to leave the company or whatever, then they're screwed. So, all right, next one is iterative improvement. I'm not doing the actual like definition I wrote, but
Iterative improvement.
yeah,
So each iteration you're improving over the last one then by collaboration, right? Because you're thinking about, this is the way that it is. How can we improve upon this, make it better, and how can we keep moving forward? That goes with that continuous integration, continuous development too, right? That you keep producing something that's better than the last, improving on it in some way.
exactly. Yep. So basically, it allows you to make small changes over time versus these big giant leaps in changes in your
Which collaboration
code
again
base.
is good because you get different perspectives, so people can bring in different viewpoints on what's going to actually improve this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, number 6, and this one's related to the last one, integration ease. This is for you, Randall.
Yeah, well, you don't want to make it too difficult to add
Yeah.
to what's already working.
Yeah,
So definitely, so that you don't have to stop production in order for this new feature to be added.
yeah,
And that's
exactly.
I think a lot of that comes down to a lot of the DevOps principles where they want to have many small uh, improvements as opposed to these big giant things. And as frustrating as it may be to get updates for every app you have, every week or even more quickly, it's the best way to keep the apps up and running because each change is just a teeny little bit. And if they need to roll back, it's not a big rollback that they have to do.
Yep. Awesome. And the last one is transparency.
Transparency should be clear in and of itself. But yeah, when you collaborate, I mean, I think a lot of these all point to the same thing, right? You don't
Yeah.
have one person writing it by themselves. So everybody in the group actually understands it. So it's not dependent on one, it's not like a house of cards dependent on one card. It's dependent on
Yeah.
a big wide base. So even if one falls, you still have the structure stand, basically, right? And that transparency is important because the more you collaborate and discuss with people, the more they know what you're working on, the more they understand the project, and the more they also understand like clarity, just knowing the requirements that you're trying to code for and stuff like all of that, like any confusion in the process can lead to code that doesn't actually need to be there or that isn't correct. And
Yeah.
so getting it right early is always better and more efficient.
Yeah, I like that. I think about it like this, right? Like when you're developing software, you're headed towards this goal of I want this thing to do this thing, right? I want, an input of this to provide this output. And sharing your code early and often adds to the transparency. Also, just on a full company-wide scale of, right? There's people who aren't developers who have stake in what you're doing, like the CEOs, the marketing managers, all these people need to understand what's happening in development, and they may not understand how development works, but they do need to understand how it affects them and their roles. And so sharing your code early and often means that there's more transparency, not only between developers, but also between the other stakeholders in your company. So they can say, hey, you're developing this, but that's not actually what I meant in last week's meeting about doing that. It needs to be headed more in this direction so that, you start going towards this goal. And at some point you may stray from that, but by being transparent, people can bring you back towards that goal.
Can I make one
Okay.
more point about
Yeah.
collaboration too? I think it's just important too because there are other stakeholders. Communication is essential to get a job, to code, to do anything. And it's learning how to communicate with others about code in a way that's understandable. And when you collaborate
Yeah.
often and share often, you also learn how to do that because your friend might not know React, but you do. So learning how to explain that to them in a way that makes sense to make sense of this code, that'll help you leaps and bounds in the future when you're dealing with a stakeholder that doesn't program and that knows nothing about it, and you're frustrated trying to explain why the edit button's that way. You need,
Yeah.
you need to be able to explain it carefully and clearly. And communication is essential to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'd be fooling yourself if you thought you will not be dealing with stakeholders at some point in your career as a software developer, because probably half of what you do is explaining to people who aren't developers what's happening
If you
behind the
want a
scenes.
job, that's what you're going to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like at least 50% of what you'll be doing.
Yeah.
So cool.
All right.
So did you guys like that? Are you going to read the book now?
I'm
Yeah, I
thinking
might check
about
it out.
listening to it.
It's actually a really good book, and it's
I
pretty
got a
long.
whole
Like,
long list of other books that
yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
working on, but yeah.
it's I've been listening to it every day when I do my walk, and it's really good, but it's like 24 hours of listening content. So it's quite a long book.
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
slog. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good though. I mean, everything I've listened to in there has been pretty interesting because it relates to basically how, I mean, when you think about it, Google is so massive, right? Think about how many employees work at Google in different locations and how they're still able to create these software
Dude, think
products.
about how many millions of lines of code too they probably are
Billion,
dealing with.
billions and
Yeah.
trillions of lines of
Yeah.
code. Yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
for all their operating system, all this stuff. Yeah, it's
yeah.
insane.
And
Yeah,
when
keeping
you
it
think
running.
about that, to have that many people touching a project and their products still look consistently good, they all work consistently good, you know, it's sort of mind-blowing, and it's because of these principles that they built over time that have allowed them to do that. And so as a developer, if you're trying to be hired by a company like Google, it's really important to learn these principles early and often, and that way you can become a Googler one day maybe. So
Nice.
Cool. So that's it for the topic of the day. If you guys are looking to build on some of these skills, particularly working with other people, one of the best things you can do is collaborate with a team, right? And we can be your team as you're learning to code. If you haven't seen this week, we have started our private and group mentoring. I really highly recommend group mentoring for anybody who wants to be a serious developer because, like we just discussed for about a half hour, working in isolation as a developer is one of the worst things you can do, right? Because you literally can't learn from just tutorials. They are a piece of the puzzle, but they are not the whole thing. The other piece of that puzzle is human interaction. That is what you're going to do as a developer 90% of the time. 10% is coding, 90% is actually talking to people about code. And so one of the best things you can do is be in a group right now as a developer who's learning and learn these skills. As you're learning the code, you can learn these skills as well. So I want to talk to you guys really briefly just about what is group mentoring because this is a new offer and I'm sure a lot of people have questions. So I just want to answer them here. So here's what it is. Every week, directly after this call, so technically in a half hour after this, we can give you a little break. At 10 a.m., we have a 2-hour session. It's the three of us, all three mentors here, myself, Danny, and Randall. And each week we'll be doing 2 hours. The first half hour of that call will be a live training. There will be different topics ranging from HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all the way up to React. We're going to start from the very basics from, what is the internet? How does the internet work? What's going on behind the scenes? And then we'll walk you through everything from HTML, styling through CSS, JavaScript, which is all your animation, and then React, which is, probably the most popular JavaScript framework out there right now. So if you are looking for a job, that's one really useful way to learn web development because there's a lot of companies that use React. So the first half hour is going to be 30 minutes of live training. We'll actually build and code things with you, teach you a little bit about each of those topics. And then the remaining 1.5 hours is going to be a mix of code reviews. So if you have code that you're working on, I mean, this is what we have done for the past couple of years, right? So our group, we've styled this after what we've actually done, just the three of us, which is each week we teach each other a little bit about what we've learned, right? So Randall will teach us a little bit about cybersecurity. Danny will teach us a little bit about Python, and I teach a little bit about web development. And then we share what we've been working on, right? And it may sound like, I think to some people there's not too much value in that, but I think this is one of the most valuable things that I've done over the past 2 years is being able to show people and getting valuable feedback from people I trust, people I care about, and learning from other people, right? Because there's so many things that I have done when I am developing in web development. Literally this week, I was talking to my coworker about a security principle and they're like, man, it's not that important. I was like, they're like, we're a startup. We can wait till later for that. I'm like, well, okay, that makes sense. But if we don't do this, literally everybody can read everybody's data. So that's probably not secure, right? So it's things like that where you may not think about it, or maybe when you're developing and you're watching a tutorial, you're like, why do they do it this way? Or is this the best practice, right? And you want somebody who you can just ask because sometimes you can't get that question, the answer to that question by maybe asking ChatGPT or looking on Stack Overflow. Sometimes there's just not that answer because it's so specific to what you're doing. And it's really great to just have a person who you can be like, hey, this is what I'm working on. Should I or should I not salt this password? Or should I or should I not have this API key on the front end of my application? Right? How do I secure that? Things like that, right? And so that's why group mentoring is so powerful. We are not, by all means, the experts of everything, but it is a way for you to learn how to find these answers, right? So that's basically what it is. First half hour is training. The rest of it is code reviews, knowledge sharing. What else, guys?
I would say, you get accountability. And because it's weekly, so you're actually going to get a chance to actually work with other people and keep coding and motivate you to code. On top of that, too, I would also add that I think you're more likely to have those aha moments because you have people that are way more experienced working with you to help you explain things. And I can give you examples. I remember first time I worked with Django or React, the file structure, once I understood that, it made it so much easier, but no
Yeah.
one explains it. And no
Yeah.
one explains it in a way that makes sense. So like that kind of stuff can be such an aha moment that can just advance your learning so fast. And it just makes
Yeah.
things so much easier. But you don't get that when you're working by yourself either. And you're not going to find it out there on all those like on all the how-tos and YouTube videos and stuff that are very basic, most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember like wondering what package.json was for the longest time. And I was so scared to ask anybody that I never did. And I really didn't even have somebody to ask. And so like having something like this, I mean, I wish I could have something like this going back to when we first started.
Oh yeah.
I wish there was a group that I could have paid for and to join like that, but there wasn't. And that's why we founded what we did, right? We started working together and doing these groups every week. So having said that, it's a great opportunity for you guys. Basically, you're getting like a full coding boot camp if you stay in the group mentoring. Over the next like year as we build this out, you're basically getting a full coding boot camp. You get access to all of the replays. So every week we're going to record a video. You'll have access to all of those inside your account. So that really you are getting like a full live boot camp plus you're getting an engaged group, right? It's not just some group of people who don't care. We really care, and we really care about helping people. As you can probably see, like we're doing these every week for free for you guys because we care and we love software development. We want to build the next generation of amazing software developers. So that's what we're doing. The cost of it is $197 per month, which you may be like, oh my God, that's so much money. It's really not. When you think about it, you get 4 sessions per month. It's every Saturday and it's 2 hours, right? So it's really, when you break it down, it's $25 per hour. It's literally cheaper than like a freaking spinning class or like 2 Starbucks coffees. Literally. I think Starbucks, like a Starbucks coffee goes for like almost $20 now.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So
some other things that I'm not sure if you covered was
sure.
project-based coding. So you did mention the code reviews, but a lot of what we're going to be emphasizing is project-based learning because at the end of the day, that's what's going to get you a job. Like I remember you, Russ, when you were showing some potential employers websites that you designed, they're like, "Oh my gosh, do you know who made this site? Can you get them? We need that person to work for us." And you're like, "That's me." You're like, I did that.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the startup that I worked for, I showed them a project that I built and they were like, who worked on this with you? This is amazing. And I was like, it's like all of it was me, all of it. And they were like, no, but who did and I was like, no, that was me too. It was all me.
All of it. Yeah.
And so when you actually go to approach employers, if you start showing them tic-tac-toe, you've lost. You're never going to get a job by showing people tic-tac-toe or a to-do list. Nobody cares. Everybody's done that before. What we want to do is help you build, amazing web apps that you can show. That's like, hey, I want to get a job in like the tourism industry. Cool. So let's build a web app that helps people find flights for cheaper, right? It's things like that where an employer's like, wow, this person went above and beyond. They're not just building the general apps that you see. They actually like built something that's powerful, that works, and that helps people. And that's what you need to do if you want to find a job, particularly like a 6-figure job, right? You can find software development jobs for 5 figures pretty easily. But I don't think that many people want to be working for like $30,000 a year doing software development, right? I think you guys, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
And then also the other thing was just kind of helping to give direction because a lot of people that we've spoken with mention that they seem somewhat lost, maybe in orbit, not really knowing what direction to go.
Yeah.
And all of us have experienced that point at some time in our careers. And all of us have found different ways to find our direction and have had different courses in ways that led to careers, but also in ways that led to finding what was most essential for us to learn. So that's another benefit of this group mentoring is that you'll get access to all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there it is. If you guys want to join, the website to join is CodeNoobs, CodeNoobs.io/join-group-mentoring. We'll put the link below this video so you guys can see it. I know that was a long link, but
Wait, /don't join?
No, it's
join group mentoring.
Join CodeNoobs. Did I say don't?
You said don't.
Oh, maybe I misspoke. Do join.
Ugh.
It's join dash. I think I said dash. That's why. Join dash group dash mentoring. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll
Cool.
put it in the
We'll just
bottom.
put the
We'll
link
put a link
below.
below.
Just click the
Yeah.
link. That's like a new
Yeah.
thing. We have this technology where you can just click links. We'll just
Just
put it
click
below
the
so
link.
you guys can join. But yeah, once you get in there, you also get a little free bonus. It's a little PDF that we have. It's called A Beginner's Guide to Web Development, and it walks you through literally everything you need to know, like a little blueprint for you of everything you're going to need to learn to become a full stack developer, like from HTML, CSS, databases, SQL, NoSQL, all that stuff is in one place. So you can just read it and be like, ah, this is my path. If I want to become a web developer, it's right here. Bang,
That's all
done.
you gotta do. Yeah.
So with that, thank you guys so much for tuning in again. Happy Saturday. And if you are in the group, we will see you in 15 minutes.
Later, folks.
Peace, guys. See you next
Later.
week.